The state of college football is a bit chaotic these days. So where does Notre Dame stand in it all? Matt Fortuna and I discuss on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Monday, March 4th, and thank you for getting your week started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer covering college football for Fox Sports, and this show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So whether you're watching or listening today, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. And this episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. We got national college football reporter Matt Fortuna back on the show today, and it's the perfect time because there's a lot going on in the world of college football right now, plus Notre Dame kicks off spring practice later this week, and Matt and I are both very high on what the Irish can accomplish this season, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you do as well. Check it out. Really excited about this. Matt Fortuna from the Inside Zone is back on the show. It's been a while, so there's a lot of different things I want to ask you about, but I'll start with a big picture question, and then you can kind of take it anywhere you want. In your mind, what is the biggest problem facing college football as we head into the 2024 season and beyond?
That's a loaded one. And it's an interesting one, right, Tyler? I mean, I made this remark on my show with Pete earlier today, and I mean it. As weird as it sounds, like the people in charge are the biggest problem, I think, of college football. There has not been a whole lot of foresight, and right now you've got a group of commissioners who, for the most part, are just looking out for their own and not for the greater good. And you can have a healthy debate about whether that's the right approach or not. But, this is a sport that's going on its 155th year of existence, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems like it's worked in spite of the people in charge of it all this time. Like, it's so awesome. It's so wild. It's so fun. Like, you can't ruin it no matter how much certain people seem to be trying to do that. It took 146 years to get a playoff. Like, why did that take so long, right? We were told that the BCS was the only way to go, and we couldn't have a playoff because of class calendars and things of that nature. And I don't see anyone talking about missed class time right now as we talk about expanding the playoff to 14 teams. We had, and this is more of a college sports criticism than college football in particular, but I remember Larry Scott, the ex-Pac-12 commissioner, saying, we can't have NIL, it will ruin women's sports. Caitlin Clark and women's basketball and tons of other sports seem to be doing just fine in the NIL era. So there's always this boogeyman around the corner that, we're kind of teased about, saying that we can't do this because this will happen. And in reality, it's just not true. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I just think, when you look at the talk right now around expanded playoff, let's get to 12 first before we get to 14. No one's clamoring for 14. No one wants to see the ACC get 2 guaranteed bids and have a 17-seed Wake Forest make the playoff like they would have 2 years ago just because they're guaranteed that spot. I don't think there's anyone clamoring for that. I think, college football is not like college basketball. The beauty of March Madness is in the game of basketball, in theory, anyone can beat anyone on any given day. There's certainly an element of that in college football, and that's why we like it. But let's be real here. If you have a mid-tier ACC team playing a Georgia or an Alabama at full strength, does anyone really want to see that when championship stakes are on the line?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think your point about the leaders being the biggest problem makes a ton of sense because they are the people who are making these decisions that lead to the problems that the sport is having. And I think, the NCAA, they're like the easiest punching bag of all time. And now they're essentially powerless after the recent federal ruling. And I want to get into that. But staying on the topic of leaders, I always felt like with Jack Swarbrick in charge as the athletic director at Notre Dame, that Notre Dame was always going to be in a good position in these discussions. He was the only athletic director in the room when they were discussing the expanded playoff to begin with. And I think that he has a proven track record to get Notre Dame in the right place when the time comes. and he's able to negotiate that, despite, what some fans might think of Swarbrick. Now Notre Dame is not only bringing in a new athletic director and Pete Bavacqua, they also have a new university president. So I don't know if you've had a chance to meet with Pete or the new president or anything like that, but what sense do you get about their position in the college landscape and sort of what their goals are for Notre Dame in this new era of college athletics?
Yeah, Tyler, it's a good question. I mean, I haven't gotten a chance to spend time with really either of them. I mean, I've met Pete, said hello, but I don't think he's done any interviews so far. He takes over March 18th full time, so it's pretty soon. And he's obviously been around in the meetings with Jack Swarbrick and on the sidelines at football games and whatnot. But I think Jack Swarbrick, when you look at his legacy as Notre Dame's athletic director, when you're the athletic director at Notre Dame, you're really a de facto conference commissioner because, like you said, Tyler, you're in those rooms with other commissioners, even though you're only representing one school. And I think, the most important thing Jack did and the most important thing that Pete Bavacqua will have to do is keeping Notre Dame at that table, right, as sort of its own entity. We talk about independence and what would it take for Notre Dame to join a conference and yada, yada, yada. Well, Jack Swarbrick did a lot of maneuvering to make sure Notre Dame always had a seat at that table. I mean, we kind of take it for granted now and we laugh about it given the state of the ACC, but to get that deal from the ACC when the Big East was completely crumbling 10, 11, 12 years ago, that took a lot of foresight and a lot of savvy negotiating on Notre Dame's behalf to make that happen. And really that was a game changer, I think, for the football program and really the athletic department, because it's not just that they got into a conference for all their Olympic sports. They got into the ACC, which is where they belong when you look at lacrosse, basketball, and all the other Olympic sports there. So maintaining that seat at the table and having that voice, among the power brokers of college football. Again, we're probably only going to have it for 2 years, but it looked like the 12-team playoff was a game changer and going to be awesome. And part of the reason we were getting a 12-team playoff is because Jack Swarbrick was one of the 4 people tasked with devising that new system. And so you knew that Notre Dame was going to be taken care of because Notre Dame's athletic director was one of the people helping devise these rules. And Notre Dame will be taken care of in the 14-team playoff, or whatever further expansion they end up doing, because I don't think it'll stop at just 14 teams. I believe they'll have a clause out where if they're ranked in the top 14, they're guaranteed a bid, which pretty damn impressive, right? I mean, I don't know. Again, if that's a system, that's a system. I don't know too many people who look at the 14th ranked team in the country every year and say that team deserves a shot to win the championship. But to have that baked in is going to be very, very beneficial for Notre Dame.
Okay, so you feel like if the 14-team playoff format happens, Notre Dame's independence is still safe, because I feel like you're right. If that is the case, if they end up making the clause that all Notre Dame has to do is finish in the top 14, in that case, I think they're going to be able to remain independent. I don't know if that's going to end up being the final ruling, because I think we're still in like the infancy phases of those discussions. So I kind of feel like the probability that they'll join a conference is much higher today than it was probably a year ago when we knew about the 12-team playoff format with 6 at-large bids and now 7. So how does all this affect Notre Dame's independence in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's more probable in the sense that, so much has changed, right? I mean, you've got a new athletic director and a new president, and while I'm sure they're all aligned with the previous regimes or current regimes thinking, you don't know. I mean, there's change coming at the most important spots on campus, so you don't know exactly what that will bring. When I first saw the proposals being leaked this week and I saw the formats and saw only 3 at-larges, my first reaction was, is this bad for Notre Dame? Like, is this the tipping point? And I didn't think it would get to that point because, again, Jack Swarbrick played such a pivotal role. I mean, to go back a little bit, Bob Bowlesby, Craig Thompson, and Greg Sankey got together, I believe, in January of 2019 to put together a new playoff system. They came up with the 12-team system that we will have in place the next 2 years that only got officially rubber stamped as far as procedurals and requirements and conference champions and whatnot a couple of weeks ago, which is crazy to think about, right? After basically 2-3 years of bickering. So I didn't think it would be, all right, thanks for your work, Jack. We're only going to do this for 2 years. Get out of here. Notre Dame's toast. I didn't think it would be that blunt. And again, it sounds like there will be a clause for Notre Dame to make the playoffs as long as they're in the top 14. But I'm with you in the sense of, if it took us just 10 years to go from 4 to 12, and it's going to take us just 2 years after that to go from 12 to 14, I just don't think this is the end point. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're talking about a 14-team playoff with guaranteed buys for the Big Ten and SEC champion, just weeks after the Big Ten and the SEC announced that they have this joint advisory group that they're forming together, right? I mean, these are the two biggest powers in college football. They have the biggest brands. They have the most money by far. You can't really compare them to, outside of Notre Dame, schools in the other Power 5 conferences like the Big 12 and the ACC. And I'm still not convinced that this isn't a longer play for those two leagues to just break off and do their own thing away from the NCAA. I think that's coming. That's inevitable. I think it's coming a lot sooner than a lot of us are anticipating. I wouldn't be surprised if this was just a negotiating ploy to say, all right, see ya. We're going to be the AFC and the NFC. You're either with us or you're not. And that's where, if you're an independent like Notre Dame, you start to wonder about, what's the best course of action for our future here.
Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. First, they've got the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and grid escapes, and it's the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. The Pathfinder has room up to 8 in expansive cargo capacity and advanced available 4x4 capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Yeah, that's been the weird thing to me during all these discussions. It's like, why are we talking about all these automatic qualifiers, a 14-team playoff format? First of all, we haven't even played the 12. Put that to the side. But it also feels like any day now, the next wave of conference realignment is going to start. I don't know if it's going to be as drastic as what we experienced last year when we basically watched the Pac-12 evaporate right in front of our eyes, but it does feel like big change is coming. What do you think is going to be the next domino to fall?
UMass to the MAC, baby. Just happened this week. That's a good question because you've got this kind of no man's land with the ACC right now, where one of their biggest brands, Florida State, is literally suing them to get out of the grant of rights. And I think that's going to be a long, ugly, drawn out affair. And I don't know if there's a happy ending for either side there. The legal experts don't seem to think Florida State has much of a case here. That being said, has that relationship reached past the point of no return? And if that's the case, does Florida State get out of the ACC? And once they're out of the ACC, are they a desirable property for the Big Ten or the SEC? I don't know. So it's a bit of a weird spot to be in right now, because I think outside of Notre Dame, all the desirable properties for the most part have been scooped up. Of course, if Carolina or Virginia or other bigger brands and some of these, I hate to say it, but smaller conferences become available, they'll be scooped up. But again, I think the Big Ten and the SEC are inching closer and closer to breaking off and doing their own thing. And what form that takes on, is it still the traditional Big Ten, the traditional SEC? I don't know. I just think you're going to have your blue bloods and your big brands that are still in some of those other conferences that are going to get scooped up. And there are going to be others that are kind of left to the wayside to figure it out on their own, whether that's under the NCAA umbrella or not. I don't know. I think you could say fascinating, you could say interesting. It's definitely a volatile time in college athletics right now. And, I think we're all just kind of wondering what's going to happen next. Because again, I don't think anyone's clamoring. I don't think any fans, media, anyone's clamoring for a 14-team playoff right now. I don't think anyone's banging the drum saying we got to get automatic buys for the Big Ten and SEC champions. I just don't get it. I think conference champions should be in the way that it's going to be in the 5+7, 12-team era. Let's see that work or not work first before we expand further. I mean, the great thing about the 12-team playoff, when they unveiled it, it was so shocking because we all thought they would go to 6 or 8 before 12. And you had these commissioners essentially say, we're looking out for the best interests of college football. And I took them at their word at the time, because again, it's going to be great to have a group of 5 team in the playoff every year, even if they have no shot at winning it. It's going to be great to have teams like, an NC State or a Baylor or, teams that are good, but not annually contending for a 14 playoff. It's going to be great to have them play meaningful games in November with a chance to make the college football playoff, and to think of the recruiting momentum that they can get out of that and how they could change their programs for the better. I think that's awesome. And a 14-team playoff with guaranteed bids for everyone, multiple guaranteed bids for everyone, it just kind of cheapens the thing in my mind. Again, I don't think anyone's clamoring for the 14th best team in the country to have a shot at a national championship. It's just football is a different sport than basketball, and I just don't think it'll be nearly as fun.
Yeah, the problem, Matt, is that you are using sound, rational logic, which is something that I don't think is too prevalent during these discussions, because it's not about what's best for the sport. It's not about what would be the best for the fans and the best for these programs. It's always going to be about the money. We know that. We've gone over it. I actually did an exercise where I basically went through what the 14-team playoff format would look like if it happened last year. And it's not perfect because I was basically looking at future Big Ten teams, so I'm including Oregon on the side of the Big Ten, and these teams are going to play each other, so it's going to look a little bit different. But I looked at it and I was like, oh, I don't like this at all. This is gross. You got like Oklahoma State and Kansas State getting in, and they're not even in the top 20 in the country. So look, I've spent a lot of time talking about it. We'll get there eventually. We'll cross that bridge when we have to, but we've kind of talked a lot about the sport as a whole and the problems facing it. What do you think is the biggest problem facing Notre Dame football right now? Because I think they've made significant advancements with NIL, the transfer portal. There's always going to be some things that they have to deal with academically, the location, all of that stuff. But Notre Dame's trying to end a 36-year drought since the last time they won the national championship. What's the biggest thing getting in the way of that these days?
Yeah, Tyler, I think it's been a very, very good offseason. One of the best I can remember. And I'll knock on wood right after I say that because, spring ball is 6 days away and, it's a long offseason ahead still. But, as far as getting Mike Denbrock as the offense coordinator, who, my colleague Pete Sampson likes to say is the Al Golden of offense, and probably even more important for this program, given that you have a young head coach with a defensive background, getting Riley Leonard as quickly and as seamlessly as they did. I just think there's a lot of positive momentum right now for the program. Obviously, you can look ahead to next year's schedule and the expanded playoff and say this is a playoff or bust kind of season. On the field, I have some question marks just as far as replacing so many faces on the offensive side of the ball, particularly up front on that offensive line. I think we take for granted how good they've been year in and year out. And I don't think they'll be bad next year, but they're replacing 4 starters. That's not something that you can just snap your fingers and fix overnight, especially when arguably your toughest game is going to be in the opener on the road at Texas A&M. So, there are certainly some questions from a football standpoint, on the field. But in the big picture, I think this program's in a very, very healthy place. I think Jack Swarbrick, Pete Bavacqua, the overall administration has done everything they can to, I hate to say eliminate excuses, but really at the end of the day, that's the job of an athletic director when it comes to the relationship with the coach. It's to give them all the tools they need to succeed and to see where this program is from a university standpoint, an admission standpoint, NIL standpoint between even this time last year and now, I think is night and day. You compare the OC search of a year ago to the OC search of this year, night and day, right? Like, boom, we got Mike Denbrock before the bowl game, all said and done. Boom, we got Riley Leonard, right when he went in the portal, all said and done. I think the efficiency with which the entire administration and university is operating is in keeping with that of a program that's very, very serious about football. And, maybe Notre Dame fans want to hear this, maybe they don't. I think seeing a team like Michigan win it all the way they did, it's got to be encouraging, even if you hate seeing Michigan win it, right? To see a Midwestern power, a big academic school, a like-minded institution win the title the way they did has got to be encouraging in some regard too, right? Like they didn't just go and out recruit everyone, the way traditionally that's been the way to win a national title, particularly in the SEC. You've seen sound NIL approaches, right? It's not just we're going to throw bags of cash at the 5-star quarterback who wants to come our way. It's let's think about this. Where's our money best spent and invested? It's in retaining the talent that we have. It's in getting proven talent elsewhere that may be interested in us once they enter the transfer portal. It's getting old and staying old. And I think, I think the NIL era in a lot of ways is proving to be and will continue to be beneficial to a school like Notre Dame. Because I just think, you eliminate some of the risks that comes with putting all your eggs in the basket of high school football players. It eliminates some of the bells and whistles aspect that comes with recruiting. The GOO 2.0 is eventually going to come and it's overdue, but it's also not the facilities race. I don't think is going to be as important as it was, pre-NIL, right? I think your money's going to be most wisely spent when it comes to talent acquisition, more so than, hey, here's a fancy, waterfall or a slide or what have you, right? Like, especially when you're going after transfers who are upperclassmen, they're past that, right? They just want to know what's going to get them ready for the NFL, where they're going to be able to develop holistically the best. And I think Notre Dame is in a really good position right now to be able to do all of that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and especially your point about the offensive line. That is by far my biggest concern looking ahead to the 2024 season. I feel like the group that Notre Dame currently has is closer to the group they had in 2021 compared to what they had last season, and we all know how much that unit struggled, at least throughout the first half of the year. They were eventually able to figure it out, and I think Tommy Rees deserves some credit for modifying the offense to a more fast-paced, quick decisions for Jack Cohn, so the defensive line wouldn't be able to get in the backfield. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mike Denbrock to sort of figure things out on the fly. The good thing is Mike Denbrock has certainly demonstrated that he's capable of doing that. So having a coordinator duo in Mike Denbrock and Al Golden, I think it brings a sense of comfort to the fan base, and I'm sure the team as well, that they have the right guys in place, especially to support a young head coach in Marcus Freeman, who is still learning on the job. And when I look at the coordinator tandem between Golden and Denbrock, I think it stacks up with pretty much anyone in the country. Like, how do you think that coordinator duo compares to some of the top programs in college football?
It's right up there, right, Tyler? And to go back to your last question too, I mean, 4-year contracts for both your coordinators. That was unheard of at a place like Notre Dame, and really a lot of places. And again, shows the investment that these guys are making into their football program. And I think, a rising tide lifts all ships. When Notre Dame football is doing well, the university is doing well, and vice versa. So, I haven't thought of it in the context you asked. I mean, had Ryan Grubb stayed at Alabama, I think him and Kane Womack, who was a head coach last year, would give anyone a run for their money as far as coordinator tandems. But right now, when you look at what Notre Dame did defensively last year under Al Golden, when you look at LSU, the number one offense in the country and the Heisman Trophy winner under Mike Denbrock, it's a very, very healthy place to be. And again, you have two older guys who have kind of been there and done that in their careers. Not that there's anything wrong with younger guys in those positions, but you've got two adults in the room who, especially in Mike Denbrock's case, this is his third tour of duty at Notre Dame. He knows all the ins and outs of the place. He's not going to BS you. He knows what it takes to succeed there. And, getting his feet wet in the SEC the last couple of years certainly helped as well. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to think of a situation that either of these coordinators hasn't been in at some point in their career where, with Jared Parker, was that the case, right? If you fall behind in Death Valley, or, you've got a drive against Ohio State to ice the game, it's different, right? Someone throws something at you and you got to adjust in game. I'm not saying they did or didn't do that, but, I just think, Mike Denbrock's won against Alabama. Al Golden's seen it all at this point. That's a very, very healthy place to be in right now as Marcus Freeman goes into his third year as Notre Dame's head coach.
Yeah, I don't think it's one. I think that crown belongs to Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles down in Columbus. That's a pretty impressive tandem over there. But I think they've got a good argument for two or anywhere else in the top five. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. And one thing that I don't think is getting talked about enough when it comes to Al Golden is that Notre Dame was able to keep him from going to the NFL. And I don't know, I can't say for certain if an NFL team offered him a defensive coordinator job. As a matter of fact, I don't think that happened. But I think if Al Golden decided after the season, you know what, I'm done with college football, I'm going to the NFL, he would have found a good opportunity. And it feels like at this time, the disparity in coaching between college and the NFL and the lifestyle that those guys have is greater than it's ever been. I've always said coaching in the NFL is better than college because you don't have to kiss the ass of a 16-year-old on FaceTime or Snapchat, and you deal with grown men. So I've always felt like it's better. Now it feels like with NIL and transfer portal, it's greater, but it's actually getting to the point with some of these coaches where they talk about how brutal it is that I think it's getting a little bit overblown. Like, how do you look at the difference between coaching in the NFL compared to college these days?
Yeah, Tyler, I'm glad you brought that up. I thought Kenny Dillingham, the head coach of Arizona State, raised a good point a week or two ago when he said something like, I'm tired of all this complaining. Like, I'm doing the only job I ever wanted to do. I worked unpaid, however many years just to have a chance at this. Like, if you don't like it, leave. I get it. 2 years ago at the combine, so 2 years ago this week, I did a story talking to guys at the NFL who had been in college. And it was basically an anonymous survey saying, like, what are the differences? Would you ever go back? Yada, yada, yada. And almost to a man, they said, I'm never going back unless it's for a head coach job or a real good coordinator job. Now, I will say the NFL seems to have upped its salary levels, at least the head coaching job. Like Jim Harbaugh's making reported $16 million a year. Sean Payton's making, I think, $18 million a year. No one at college is making that. So, the NFL is kind of equalizing, the difference financially in that regard. But the differences then, as they are now, were great, right? I mean, it's not just no recruiting. It's that, if you have a night game, if you're playing on Sunday Night Football, you show up to the game and you coach it. You're not hosting recruits all day long, right? Like all these little things, the camps in the summer, the fact that your phone's not ringing in the middle of the night because you're coaching 18 to 22-year-old kids, and sometimes bad things happen when you're that age. It's a lot. I mean, it's a big difference. Like I think rationally, yes, like NFL sounds like a much, much better lifestyle right now than college, but it's not like it's terrible for college. They're getting paid really well as head coaches and for the most part coordinators. Like I get it too. Like I get why Jeff Hafley left. He had 3 winning seasons in 4 years at Boston College. He was on the hot seat this year. He survived it. He was going to be on the hot seat next year. His first game's at Florida State. They were probably going to get blown out, and he'd be playing from behind all year long at a place that, frankly, does not invest the way that I think most power conference programs should invest to succeed at. You go to the NFL, you make a little bit less money to be a DC at a prime program like the Green Bay Packers. You have a good year there. Guess what? You're probably an NFL head coach, or at least NFL head coaching candidate, and you restart your clock. So I get all of that. But I do think some of it is getting blown out of proportion. Like this idea that no one's ever going to want to coach in college again and yada, yada, yada. I have a hard time seeing that. I think Boston College is a very, very unique job and situation that would create that circumstance. A lot of the movement has been college to college too, right? It's the head coaches giving that up to take coordinator jobs. Chip Kelly obviously was a huge one, going to Ohio State. King Womack giving up the South Alabama head job to go to Alabama to be a DC. Mo Linguist giving up the Buffalo head job to go to Alabama and be a co-DC. So if you're looking at like trend lines and things that like may project out to the future, I think it goes back to the earlier conversation of, what's going to happen if you're not in a Big Two conference. A good MAC head coach just gave up his job to not even be a coordinator at the SEC level. He's going to increase his salary. He's probably going to up his profile for future jobs, and he's never going to have to take a 3 or 4 or 5 hour bus ride on a Tuesday night to play in a game that 12 people are going to watch. You're going to be in prime time every game you play in when you're at Alabama. That's where I think you start to look at this thing and say, okay, what's broken here? What needs to be fixed? And for me, that's the group of 5 and some low-level Power 5 schools that are in a lot of trouble here. I look at more through that context than I do, well, college football's done. Everyone's going to go to the NFL. Like, there are only so many NFL jobs, and there's still going to be a lot of college jobs, and most of them still pay pretty damn well.
And the NFL is certainly not afraid to make a bad hire or two. As a Browns fan, I've seen a lot. So I'm going to hold off.
Here. I think we got this one right, but there were a lot of bad ones before that.
Yeah, I'm going to hold off on sounding the alarm until a big name Power 5
you got Tommy Reese this year. I forgot. Browns fan.
That's true. Hey, and Stefanski, coach of the year, despite the fact that I think he got like a D rating on the NFLPA survey, which was kind of shocking.
Joe Flacco, comeback player of the year over DeMar Hamlin.
Yeah,
don't get
exactly.
that. And the guy who got suspended for gambling got some votes in that department. So I guess if you screw up on a parlay, you can get a comeback player of the year vote. But
yeah,
here nor there.
I think when it comes to the coaching, like if Ryan Day were to leave Ohio State to become the Bears offensive coordinator after having a good season at Ohio State, then I'd be like, okay, there might be some serious problems here that college football is going to have to address. But we've talked a lot about some of the issues that are facing the sport. I feel like I want to end here on somewhat of a positive note, because despite all the issues, you and I have already talked about it a little bit, there's plenty of things to be excited about. I think the talent level is as good as it's ever been. Interest is incredibly high. And even though I don't love everything about the expanded playoff, the 12 team, the one that we're going to have this upcoming season, it's going to be cool as hell to watch next winter. So what excites you the most about the future of college football?
The 12-team playoff for sure. Like, I'm hoping it lives up to its hype and maybe cooler heads prevail and we say, hey, this is a pretty good idea. Let's roll with it into the next contract. But this year in particular, I mean, just the number of changes coming to college football, right? The 18-team Big Ten, the 16-team SEC, the bigger and more interesting Big 12 now, adding all those Pac-12 schools. So many new faces, right? Jack Swarbrick is retiring. Gene Smith is retiring from Ohio State. The Michigan-Ohio State rivalry being flipped on its head these last 3 years, but at least on paper, it looks like Ohio State is going to reclaim that throne coming into this year. Sharon Moore taking Michigan to the next era. I think that's a very interesting job, because rarely do you see the defending champs lose their coach. And yet I think there's a line of thinking in Ann Arbor that Michigan won on the sheer force of Jim Harbaugh's will, and that there's still a lot in that program that can be elevated with a more kind of with it and younger head coach like Sharon Moore. So I'm curious to see what happens in Ann Arbor. Seeing Notre Dame go into the third year of the Marcus Freeman era with, I think, legitimate playoff or bust expectations, especially when you look at the schedule and you look at their entry points through the 12-team playoff. And seeing home on campus playoff games is going to be awesome, right? No matter where it is, no matter what the matchups are, seeing these college towns swell beyond their normal sizes for a December matchup. Maybe it's good weather, maybe it's not. I think that's going to add a whole new level of excitement to the sport as well. So, I'm very excited about it. I mean, it's March 1st as we record this. It feels like it's already been a long off season because a lot has already happened, but really spring ball hasn't even gotten started in the majority of the programs across the country. So it's going to be different. And hey, the first year without Nick Saban, right? Like that's the elephant in the room, no pun intended. When you think about it, like I compare Nick Saban to my freshman year of college was his first year at Alabama. And that's really when I fell in love with college football. And so crazy. I know college football through the lens of Nick Saban lording over it. That's not the case anymore, right? Like he was a Patrick Mahomes, a Michael Jordan, the guy who kept so many good coaches and programs, Notre Dame among them, from winning national championships that they otherwise probably would have won. And with him not there anymore, I think that flattens the college football landscape. And in Tuscaloosa in general, it's going to be very, very interesting because I think they made the best hire out there. And I still don't know if they're going to be able to stomach not being the kings of the hill kind of automatically every year.
Yeah, the Saban thing, I think, adds a new layer to this season, and also his new role on game day. It sounds like he's going to be on every week, and I think that's going to be a really interesting thing because everything he says is going to be a story, especially when we talk about the real pressing issues facing college football. So that's going to be an interesting thing. I think for me, I'm just most excited about Saturdays because, even in a really good college football season, there's always a couple weeks where you look at the slate and you're like, oh, this is gross. Usually it's earlier in the year, but then you kind of find one or two in like October or November. I really don't think we're going to have a lot of those because there's just going to be so many good games and so many fun weekends of college football. But I want to close with basically the same question, but within the context of Notre Dame. What are you most excited about to watch from Notre Dame this season? I mean, spring practice kicks off in just a few days. There's plenty of storylines we could get to. What are you most interested in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's seeing Riley Leonard and how Mike Denbrock adapts his offense to him and vice versa. Getting the offensive line situation sorted out as much as possible. And I know there's only so much you can do in spring practice with that. But when you have a quarterback who's, at least right now, known more for his legs than his arms, that's something you got to take care of and you got to shore up. Getting these guys ready for the big environment on opening night. This was a team that didn't always look like it was ready for that moment last year. Whether it was parts of the Duke game, obviously the Louisville game, the Clemson game, there's no easing into it this year. I mean, I don't know what Texas A&M is going to be like. They weren't that great of a team last year, but they still got talent there. It's a good coaching staff, as we all know. So I'm looking forward to seeing how these guys get ready for the main challenge right out of the gate. And really how this team and this coaching staff and program as a whole handle the enhanced expectations around it. Because I think with these investments that we talked about earlier, with this roster, with the schedule, it's kind of a put up or shut up kind of year in some ways. And I don't mean that to say anyone's on the hot seat or anything like that, but year 3 is always a big year at Notre Dame, both good and bad, whether you're Brian Kelly, Lou Holtz, or Charlie Weiss, or Ty Willingham. Year 3 is a big year as far as, all right, we're going to extend you, right? You're on a 5 or 6 year initial contract. This is the year where you earn your bacon, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of interesting storylines around this team. And as it relates to spring practice again underway next week, the offensive line, Riley Leonard, assuming he's fully healthy after the tightrope surgery, what he can do, what kind of competition is created within that very crowded quarterback room and how that shakes out. And seeing if there are any receivers who step up, because obviously that was it's been a sore point at Notre Dame for several years now. And you look at the class that came in, particularly with Cam Williams, I think there are expectations around this group that they have not had in a while. So I'm very excited to see what becomes of that.
Yeah, expectations are very high. And with that, there's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of pressure as well. It's going to be a fun story to follow throughout the season. So be sure to subscribe to the Inside Zone to read all of Matt's written work and listen to the independent podcast with Matt and another friend of the program, Pete Sampson. I believe you guys are going to have Micah Shrewsbury on soon, right?
We did. We just recorded it earlier today. Should be out hopefully by the time this posts as well. But yeah, Mike is awesome. And hey, shout out to him. I mean, not just for being a fellow bald guy joining the Bald Man podcast, but those guys winning 4 out of 5 and almost coming back against Syracuse the way they did, I think is very, very impressive this late in the year with such a young team. I mean, I don't think there was any doubt that he was the right hire, would be the right guy, but I think right now, especially as the calendar turns to March, you're starting to see what this guy is about and just how bright the future is for Notre Dame men's basketball.
Quick teaser. Did you give him any flack for leaving your alma mater?
I did not, but Pete did intro. Probably the only guy, only living man who's worked at both of our alma maters, DePaul, I don't know if I'm saying that right, and Penn State. So good for him.
All right, man. I can't wait to listen, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. I always appreciate the time, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Tyler.
All right, that's going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'll be back tomorrow morning. In the meantime, remember to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and follow the show on X at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, or my personal X account at Tyler WOJCIAK. I'll see you guys tomorrow.